All right, so it's December 12th. It's 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern time. So it's time for us to get into moral philosophy. We're going to read through and discuss Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, which I would argue is the most important study in your Catholic education, at least before you get into theology. As far as teenage students are concerned, assuming you're all teenagers, I don't know that for certain, but assuming you are, I would argue that Nicomachean ethics is the most important, will probably be the most helpful study that you work on. And we're just going to work through it, reading lesson by lesson, discussing the contents, making sure everything's clear. And I think you'll enjoy it. I think you'll find it helpful. So we're just going to pick up where we left off last meeting. We read through lesson 1 together. And we're going to pick up on chapter 2 and just get going. All right. So no wasted time. We're just going to dig in here. Let me let one more student in. So let's get started. So I'm going to share my screen, get our text up on the board here, and then I'll zoom in a little bit so we can read it easier. So we're in Nicomachean Ethics, Book 1, Chapter 1. This is on the Academy website. I have the whole text of Nicomachean Ethics on the website. Nice and easy to get around in because there's a table of contents that's linked to all the different chapters in the book. So easy to use, good source for the ethics. What's nice about this, if you wonder, why is it nicer to have text on a computer website rather than like a PDF? When you start typing and working and writing and things, you're going to want to have sources that you can copy and paste from. So it's good to have some online text. If you want to quote something, you can just grab a quote, copy and paste it into a paper. So it's good to have nice, clean online text available. And little by little, behind the scenes, we do this in the Academy. We retype and republish some of these works, clean them up and so on to get them back into print. But it's especially helpful to get them on the web because, like I said, if you write a lot, you copy and paste a lot. And I don't mean copy and paste like plagiarize. I mean, you just like grab quotes to use in your papers and things like that. And it's nice to have online text. That's why I don't like to study from books because I write all the time. To have all these books around on your desk and then you have to type out all the quotes, nobody got time for that. We got to get these things written and typed. So copying and pasting sources, it's good to have clean sources available. So we'll continue to work on that. But anyway, in chapter 1 of book 1 of Nicomachean Ethics, we talked about ends of human works, ends of voluntary human actions. And by ends, we mean purposes, like what people do things for. And because we're rational creatures, we do things voluntarily. And when we do things voluntarily, we do them for a purpose. We seek ends in our activities. We do things in order to obtain something, to get something that's desirable to us. So when we look at the different ends people work for, there are different qualities of ends. Some people pursue ends that are relatively low quality ends. Some people pursue ends that are really noble and most excellent ends. And so there's this hierarchy of ends that are pursued by people in different activities and things like that. And Aristotle leads us to ask the question, if there is a hierarchy of ends, what is the highest end? What is the ultimate end of all human activity? And the reason why that's important is because it gives purpose to our life. So you might not be the most important person in the world. You might not have the most important work to do in the world. But if you know that what you're doing is contributing in some way to a higher end, and that's contributing to a higher end, and that's contributing to a higher end, you can find satisfaction even in simple, humble work, knowing that you're contributing, you're playing a role in the overall pursuit of the highest end. Where if you don't know the highest end, you could just be lost out in left field, running around in circles, really have no idea what you're doing in life. And that might be fun for a few minutes, but then you start to realize, I'm not really doing anything and I need to get my act together. So it's good for us to know what the chief end is. And then as we go through life, and we have to make decisions all along the way. We just constantly continue to aim at the chief end, and we sort of move upward through the hierarchy of ends and activities, and we go from working at like the local restaurant as a part-time job, to getting a college degree, to taking a position here, and we sort of just make our way up through, and we enter into more and more important positions with that serve higher ends, and that's just how life goes. And eventually, we sort of reach the top of our pursuit in life. Normally, we get into a little bit of trouble when we try to reach higher than we should, and we find our place, and that's usually where we end up spending the rest of our life. So, in this book here, Nicomachean Ethics, we want to learn what the chief end of the human life is. It's going to surprise you because it's probably not what you expect it to be. I think most Christian students, when they read this book, they're expecting some Sunday school answer. Like, we might even have talked about this last time. Like, if you ask Christians, what's the chief end of life? They'll say something really nice like, to go to heaven, or to save our souls, or some what I call a Sunday school answer. But that's really short-sighted and selfish, because, well, what about your neighbor? Like, are all your neighbors just like rafts that you're going to use to cross the river of life, and you're just going to step on their faces and use them to climb up the wall? Or are you responsible for your neighbors too, right? So we get into the question of not just saving our own souls, we're also responsible for people around us. And that really has a very significant effect on how we live, because it might be enough for you to do this or that to save your own soul. But when you think that your behavior could cause other people to lose their souls, your behavior could cause other people to fail to save their soul, well, then obviously your behavior becomes more important. It's more complicated than just asking, what do I need to do to be saved by myself? Your life will also influence others, and your influence on others could cost you your soul. So it's more complicated. We're not created to be individuals. We're created to be social animals. We're part of a community. God never intended for us to be self-sufficient individuals. That's why we always have, we all have our own problems. We all have our own weaknesses. If you wonder, like, well, why does God make some people weird, and some people limp, and some people are left-handed, and some people have brown hair? Why does he make people, strange like that? It's because we're meant to be in community together, so it's okay if you have brown hair, because you can share in the benefits of blonde hair people. It's okay. We're a community. But seriously, obviously I'm joking. But we're given different gifts, and God does that intentionally because it makes us all dependent on each other. So you're given a gift in a certain area. Somebody else is given gifts in other areas. Some people have opportunities in one area. Other people have resources in another area. And when you put all those people together, everyone has a high quality of life. And that's how society works. So we'll see people today saying things like, oh, I wish I could live out in the wilderness by myself. I wish I could be like self-sufficient, live off the land, go out and live in Wyoming someplace, and just like, hunt for whatever, bison or whatever's out there. I don't know. And they talk about wanting to go live off the land and do this. Well, that's great for cavemen, but the problem is human beings are meant for culture. We're intellectual, we're rational. And so you really can't do that. I used to think about this all the time, because like with me, my work, I could live anywhere in the whole world. I could just pick up next week, move someplace, turn my computer on, and I'm back in business. I could go anywhere. But when you think about it, like if there's a place in the world, like let's say you're up in Montana somewhere out in the wilderness, or Wyoming, there's no Catholic church out there. So what are you going to do? You're going to move someplace where you can like hunt buffalo and not go to mass? You see how it's like an immoral decision, to say like, oh, I'm so thankful to be out here in the open country, where I can go fishing. It's like, yeah, but like you can't go to confession. So I think there's more to life than like finding a good fishing spot. And we see we're rational creatures. We're meant to be in towns and cities. We're meant to be cultured. We're meant to have education. We're meant to be in discussion with people. Socrates, for example, always talked about how he preferred to be in cities. And when people asked why did he prefer to be in cities, he said, because that's where people are. That's where I want to be. I want to be where people are. People are in cities. That's where there's learning. That's where there's culture. That's where there's education. That's where there's music. Sometimes when you're in the city, when you grow up in the city, I don't know where you guys all live, but I grew up in central New Jersey, which is very busy. My parents both worked in New York City, so we grew up in a busy suburban, urban kind of culture. And my parents always talked about leaving the Northeast and moving down south. That's how we all ended up in North Carolina. But when you get down here, you realize, like, man, I took for granted all this stuff that we used to have in New Jersey, like being able to go to shows or go to a baseball game or go to a library, or all of this stuff for the kids, like dance classes, or all kinds of social and cultural things. You move down south and yeah, it's true, you've got a nice quiet property that you can live on. There's not a lot of noise, clean air, real nice. But man, is it boring if you've been raised in a cultured place. So it's there's pros and cons, but really we belong in urban places. That's one of the things that attracted me to the Dominican order. When we became Dominicans, one of the things that I liked about Saint Dominic was that he wasn't a saint that like retired into the wilderness. He didn't go live in a cave or something like that. The Dominicans worked in schools and colleges in major cities. They debated people in major cities. They preached in major cities. And I felt more called to something like that. I'm really not interested in, retiring out into Oklahoma. Like the Clear Creek Abbey is a Benedictine monastery out there. I was invited out there to visit one time, and man, they are out in the middle of nowhere with scorpions around and stuff. That's just not where I belong. But the Dominican order, I loved it because it's city based. It's meant to be in university towns and busy cities and stuff like that. And that's really where people belong. We might go out to meditate and reflect and learn and grow spiritually, but all of that is just to go back into culture and be influential. So we're social animals. We're meant to be social. We're meant to share our gifts and share in a quality of life that none of us can have if we're on our own. We have too many gaps, too many weaknesses. We're good at just a few things. Life really isn't happy when we're isolated. So we're social animals, and we have to seek the good of everybody. And all of our decisions we make should be community-minded decisions. We shouldn't be selfish, seeking our own things. So we get into this in the ethics here. We talk about how the highest end of man is pursued through what Aristotle calls political science. And political science, in modern society, we think of American politics and we say, oh my goodness, like how can we possibly think that politics is like the chief end of man, right? They're like the creepiest people on the planet, right? The politicians. But that's not, he's not talking about democratic politics, obviously. He's talking about the science of morals for community life. That's what he's talking about. So not just personal morality, not just how can you be a good individual, but how can we help to make our neighbors happy as well? That's what political science really is. That's what politics are supposed to be for. So we're not supposed to live as slaves to a king where we all just lay down our lives and die so the king can live in luxury. The king is supposed to be working to make all of his subjects happy. And if the king can't do that, well, then, alternative forms of government are necessary. And in America, we obviously have one form of government. We see other countries with other ideas about how happiness can be pursued. But that's the question. The question is, how can we make as many people happy as possible? That's really the question of moral philosophy. And we're going to explore that by studying Aristotle here. All right, so we're going to read chapter 2 and just dig into this. So let's read this together. Aristotle says, if there is a certain end of action, which we wish to obtain for its own sake. But we desire other things on account of this. And then he says some blah, blah, blah. If this be the case, it is evident that this end will be the good and that which is the most excellent. So there's two conditions. There's two qualities that mark the most important end, and these are worth knowing. First of all, we seek it for its own sake. We seek it for its own sake. And you need to ask yourself, what in your life do you actually seek for its own sake? And you'll realize there's not very much that we seek for its own sake. You can go through this chain of things. Well, I work so I can get some money, but I don't really want money. I want to get that money because I want to have a car. But the car, I don't just want a car. I don't want to lay on my car and take pictures of it. I want my car because I want to drive, because I want to go visit the beach. So I go to the beach and then I'm at the beach and I'm like, well, why am I at the beach? Well, I'm at the beach because I like to get some sun and some exercise, because I want to look good. But I don't want to look good just for the sake of looking good so I can stare at myself in a mirror. I want to look good so that when I go, to work, I can be confident, and I can, go into a job interview and not feel like, I've got broken teeth, or I've got, my hair is sticking up in all different. I want to know that I look okay, that my looks are not an obstacle, so I can go and get a job. And I want a job so I can be happy working every day, because I don't want to have to go to a miserable job. I want a happy job. And the reason I want a happy job is because I don't want to have stress, because when I'm not at work, I don't want to be exhausted. I don't want to go home and just have to go to sleep and wake up and then go back to work. We just keep going. It just goes and goes and goes. And we realize that everything we seek is for something else, and for something else, and for something else. And it's very difficult to actually think and say, this is one thing that I want to do for its own sake. And when I do this, all of my seeking comes to an end, and I rest and I stop. It's very hard to figure out what that actually is. And for most people, especially if they're not philosophical about their lives, they can't even explain why they're doing half the stuff that they're doing. I call it chicken work. They're just like chickens. They're just moving around constantly in all different directions. And if you ever stop them and say, hey, what are you doing right now? What are you seeking? What's the next thing you're seeking? They don't even know what they're seeking. They're just moving and doing stuff. And that's what my wife and I say. We say, you're just doing stuff, just always busy moving around, but there's no plan. There's no end. And in moral philosophy, we don't want to live like that. We want to have an end. We want to have a target that everything is aiming at. So we don't just live like chickens, constantly moving around in 1,000 different directions. So the first qualification for this most excellent end is that we'll desire it for its own sake. And when we get it, we'll rest, because there's nothing else to seek. So that's the first sign that it's the ultimate end. And then the other one is that we desire other things on account of this. Everything else that we desire is for this. So it's something we desire for its own sake, and everything else we realize we desire for the sake of this. So you may just, if you start reflecting on your life and make a list of all kinds of stuff you're interested in, stuff you like to do, stuff you want to do, and you start asking, why do I want to do that? Let's say you want to get married. So, well, why do I want to get married? What am I hoping to achieve or gain through marriage? And you say, well, here's another thing I want to do. I want to go to college. Well, why do I want to go to college? Well, because I want to be a doctor. Why do I want to be a doctor? If you just meditate and start reflecting on all the things that you desire to do, and they could be much simpler things than that. Like, I want to have a milkshake. It could be just ordinary, everyday stuff. If you start asking yourself, is there something that joins all of these things together that I don't really pay attention to, but is like this silent end in my life that I'm seeking, and I just don't think about it? It's a very interesting study to do, and the kind of stuff we should be doing when we reflect on our lives. Like, what am I really seeking? Because sometimes if you take time to think about it, you'll realize, man, that's really dumb what I'm seeking. I'm on a path seeking something without really thinking much about it. And now that I realize what it is, I realize that my life is really dumb and I'm seeking something that makes no sense. And I need to fix it before I get any further down this road. I had to do that when I was in college. I was a pre-med student getting, great grades, straight A's. I was working in a chemistry lab. Everything was awesome. I had my girlfriend I was going to marry as soon as I got done with school. All my ducks were in a row. Everything was great. And I just started having those kinds of discussions with myself. Like, what am I doing? What am I actually pursuing here? Like, why do I want to go to medical school? And honestly, I wanted to go to medical school for like reasons that weren't very honorable. Like, I just wanted to be respected by other people. I got lots of praise from people because I was a Dean's List pre-med student, and it was like stroking my ego and all this kind of stuff. But when I really thought about my life, I realized that it was pretty vain and I really didn't have any plan in my life. And it was at that time that in God's providence, I met a professor who challenged me in some things and told me that I should consider education. And I remember looking at him like he was crazy. Like, last thing I ever want to do is work in schools. I'm trying to get out of here. I'm only here because I want to be a doctor. But then I ended up, understanding more about philosophy and political science, like we're going to study here. And that professor ended up influencing me and getting me to understand and think about education differently. But it was because I was on this path in my life that I really hadn't spent any time thinking through. And I was stressed out about school and working and running all over the place. And I really didn't even know where I was going. And thankfully, somebody, smacked me upside the head and said, have you ever even thought about what you're doing? And my answer was no, I wasn't thinking about what I was just sort of running with the crowd. So that's part of what philosophy is. It's taking time to stop and reflect and meditate on your life and examine yourself, to actually think about what you're doing, because we tend to be crazy. You guys were joking with me before about talking about crazy people. This is what crazy people do, right? They're like busy all over the place, angry, fist fighting on Black Friday. And if you try to talk to them and say, like, what are you crazy people fighting about? It's like, oh, I got to get this TV for my daughter. You're just crazy people. And that's just how we end up living. We live like crazy people. We don't even know why we're doing what we're doing. We're angry. We're breaking up relationships with people that are important. We're just crazy. So we've got to learn to reflect on our life, think through our ends, and try to identify what the chief end should be, and then align ourselves with that chief end. Aristotle says here, will not the knowledge of this end be of great importance with respect to life? It's like, yeah, no duh. Why don't we think about that? Wouldn't it be important to know what we're supposed to be aiming at? And he says, for by having, like archers, a target we can aim at, we shall obtain what is fit in a greater degree. It's much more likely that we'll actually achieve our goal if we accomplish this first task of figuring out what that goal is, right? So how can we even know if we're aiming at the target? Imagine being archers. What a miserable life it would be to be a bunch of archers running around with bows and arrows. And if you ask, like, hey, archer, what are you actually trying to hit? The guy says, we actually don't know. Our commander didn't tell us what the target is. We're just ready to shoot. We're just shooting stuff. We like to shoot stuff. It's like if you ever saw Disney's Robin Hood, like the two dopey archers on the wall of the tower. That's how we live. We're just like firing arrows all over the place. We have to know what the target is so we can aim at it. And then if we know what to aim at, we'll probably hit it much more successfully than if we don't. So he says, if this is the case, if there is such an end, we must endeavor to adumbrate what it is. And we've got this fancy word, adumbrate, in the chat. What does adumbrate mean? Any of you study this and figure out what adumbrate means? What does adumbrate mean? Anybody know that? I think some of you have already done this stuff. You might know already. What does adumbrate mean? to figure out, no, not exactly. What does adumbrate mean? Anybody know? No? It means to sketch it, to make a rough sketch, okay? Like an outline or a rough description. Like if I ask you, you know what a cat looks like? And you say, yeah. And I say, well, draw one. You say, well, I'm not going to draw like a detailed anatomical diagram of a cat here. I can sketch it, you know? I don't want you to like, make any life-changing decisions based on this image I draw. It's a sketch, yeah, a rough sketch, okay? And with morals, we're going to learn that morals, you can't really get specific with morals, because it's very circumstantial. Like if you were to ask me what you should eat every day, there's no way for me to give you all a diet. I can't give you all a diet and say this is what you should eat. You should eat, 1 apple and 24 ounces of this, and you should have this. It's impossible because everything is circumstantial and individual. So what's right for you, and this isn't relativism. It's not saying like you can kill people, but other people can't. It's saying that when we get into the exact definitions of morals, it's individualized because we have different strengths and weaknesses. So for example, with my wife and I grew up in a family that just ate like a buffet 24 hours a day. We all were athletic. My family was construction workers. My mother just cooked 24 hours a day, and that's how we lived. There was always food. There was always food being cooked, and you could just eat constantly because everyone was active. My wife's family was the opposite. They were like, more of her father was professional. They were more academic. They didn't play sports or anything. So they had to eat real light. So my wife can go through days without even thinking about eating. She doesn't even really care about food, doesn't care about eating. And then for me, it's like I wake up in the morning, open my eyes, and it's like, what's for dinner today? It's like the first question, right? What's the plan for our food today? And with all my sons and stuff, it's the same way. It's like survival here. We have to know that there's going to be plenty of food. But you see, like my wife and I are totally different. I will tend towards like gluttony and seeking all kinds of delicious food. My wife will tend towards temperance and really doesn't even care what she eats. And so if you were going to make a diet for my wife, you would have to actually urge her in her diet to eat more than she normally would. So morals for my wife would be, trying to push her more towards the gluttony side because of her inclination to the temperance side, or even beyond temperance to like not eating. And for me, because I'm just ready to tear into everything, you'd have to set my diet on the other side where it's kind of leaning more towards strictness. You couldn't give us the same diet. You couldn't give us the same rules because we have different inclinations, different needs, and so on. So when we get into morals, it's not really simple. I can't just like give you a set of rules to follow in your life because some of those rules wouldn't be strict enough because you have weaknesses, and some of those rules would be too strict. So when we come to moral things, we have to sketch it. We have to get a general idea of what morality means, and then we have to find out where we belong. And we're going to learn about this in detail, but we have to figure out where we should be. So for me, for example, in order to control my eating, I have to take a simple measure. Like I only eat once a day. I eat between 4 and 6 o'clock, and that's it. So I don't eat in the morning, don't eat at midday, don't eat at night. I eat just one time during the day. I can eat whatever I want during that time, but that's it. That's all I eat. My wife is more like a grazer. She's like nibbling lettuce and raisins all day long. And if I grazed all day, I'd be eating like lasagna all day long. So I can't be a grazer. I need to be a sit down 1 meal a day person. My wife can just pick. She's like eating some pecans, then she's got some cranberries, or just stuff like she's like a bird, right? I eat more like a big fat person. Yeah. So I have to be careful. Right. Yeah. A wolf. That's good. Yeah. Okay. I couldn't think of an animal that eats lasagna. So I just realized I'm just a fat person who eats lasagna. All right. Anyway. So the point is that morals are difficult because we have to, yeah, Garfield, good, that's it. Morals are difficult because it differs for each of us based on our strengths and weaknesses, our tendencies, our activities, and so on. Some people, eating a lot is necessary because they do a lot of physical work. For other people, eating even a little bit more than what's necessary will make them sick because they don't get much exercise. So it's difficult to set really clear, strict morals. We have to sketch what the morals are, get an idea of what the principles are, and then find our exact place based on our unique circumstances. Okay? So that's what it means when he says we must endeavor to adumbrate or just sketch what it is and show to what science or power this belongs. Figure out how to actually do it. It would seem that the highest end belongs to some power which is the most principal, the highest, the first, and is especially architectonic. Remember, architectonic just means a master art, an art that's higher than others. So whatever is the most architectonic, whatever is the principle, that's going to be the highest end. And he argues that the political power or political science appears to be a thing of this kind. It seems that political science, the knowledge of how to order society morally, is the highest end of life. Political science. And again, don't get this confused with modern politics or like people who go to college and study political science. Don't get that confused with what Aristotle's talking about here. He's talking about the science of the morality of a community. That's the idea. Okay. So not just seeking your own morality, your own moral life, your own happiness, which is good, but there's more to life than that. But to ask the bigger question, how can I also make as many people around me happy? That's political science. Okay. So the science of the happiness of everybody is political science. That's what politics are supposed to be about. You guys are still writing about food. All right. Keep moving here. That's my fault. I can't complain. I introduced it. All right. So when we talk about political science, make sure you realize we're not talking about Donald Trump and Joe Biden and all of this nonsense controversy stuff. You know, for George over there in England, whoever the king happens to be these days, we're not talking about the king or the queen or you know, who's being persecuted currently. I'm kidding. I know who they are. I'm just teasing. Who cares about the king? So anyway, you know, we're not talking about secular politics. We're not talking about political controversy or headlines. We're talking about the knowledge of morals and how we pursue the happiness of the most people possible, as many people as possible. If it's possible, the happiness of everyone, but we don't know if that's possible. But try to find how to order society morally, yeah, and to seek the happiness of as many people as possible, if not everyone. Okay, that's the question. That's what makes us good people, that we live a life that is actually moral within the context of social life, not just isolated individual, but community-based. All right, moving on here. He says political science seems to be a thing of this kind, how to make everybody happy. And he says, why is this? Because first of all, political science is what determines what ought to be studied in cities. When we think about what should colleges offer, what should schools offer, what should we be studying, what should the schools be teaching the kids, those questions are answered by concerns about public happiness. That's where we get those answers from. So it seems that public happiness is the chief end. Which subjects ought to be studied by different individuals and how far they should be studied. The answer to all of those practical questions seems to come from our concern for everyone being happy. We likewise see that the most honorable of the powers or faculties that we possess are arranged under this power. So the most impressive things people do, the most impressive skills, the powers or skills that are given the most honor in society by men, they tend to be skills that directly serve public happiness, right? Like he gives an example, military skill. Well, if there's a commander or a general who can save an entire city from being burned to death, that's pretty important. Why? Because public happiness is the chief end. Economic. Um, there's no question that some individuals can succeed and make lots of money. We know that. We know Elon Musk is doing well, Jeff Bezos doing just fine. We know that. But what about everybody, right? What if what they do to make themselves wealthy makes 1 billion people hungry? Obviously, that can't be allowed. So the laws of business and the laws regarding taxes and economics, those things are done to protect public happiness. So we can see that what's directing the law, what's directing the military, is the pursuit of public happiness. Rhetorical powers. People are trying to argue and persuade and debate things. What's the goal of those debates? Public happiness is the goal of those debates. So if we think about the most honorable skills and powers among men, things that are honored the most, and I'm not talking about like sports power, which, it seems popular because you turn on TV and it's all sports, or you open the newspaper and it's all sports, but that's really a very small piece of what people are actually seeking every day. It just happens to be what dominates the media, which kind of creates a false appearance. But in the bigger picture, the bigger scale, that's not what people are really interested in. The powers that really get the most honor, we're talking about military skill, economic skill, rhetorical skill, things that actually promote the public happiness. Those are the things that are most highly honored. Those are the people we give most honor to, and so on. So he goes on to say, since, however, the remaining practical sciences use political science, and since political science also legally establishes what ought to be done, and from what it is requisite to abstain or avoid, the end of this science, the political science, will comprehend in itself the ends of all other sciences. This is really what everything is for. So this will be human good itself. That public happiness is the chief end of life. That's the chief end of life. And some Christians will try to play like holy roller, and they'll say, that's not true. It really has to, it's just if we save our soul. No, that's not what we're saying. We're not saying don't save your soul. Obviously, your salvation would be part of the public happiness, right? We're not saying to destroy your soul so that everybody could have like free tacos. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about real human happiness for everyone. And because we're creatures composed of body and soul, obviously the happiness and welfare of our soul would have to be included in any real discussion of public happiness. So don't get into, like, people always try to make this like fake religious argument. You can't be happy without your soul. So it's there's nothing to talk about, right? That's what Jesus died for, right? The happiness of everyone. That's right. Okay. So Jesus obviously lived a life that was aimed at the chief end, which was not, and again, not just his own happiness. You don't see him, fussing that he didn't get a fair share of the macaroni and cheese or anything like. We don't see him complaining and fussing about not getting his, what he wants. We see him just living and sacrificing and pursuing the happiness of everybody, not even of specific individuals, but of everyone, as many as possible. He says, all who are weary, come to me, right? All who are heavy burdened, come to me and I will give you rest. He's not trying to save a few people or just like the brown-haired people. He's living a life that seeks the happiness of everyone. And that's the life we're all called to. That's the chief end of man. But notice he's not just seeking to save his own soul. He didn't just run away into the mountains to hide on all the sinners so he didn't get, tainted by all their bad ideas and their music and stuff like that. He didn't run away and hide. He was right in the presence of everybody, seeking to help and make them happy. Wasn't hiding from it, didn't have to, escape from the world. He was actually in the presence of the world, and he told us we're supposed to be the light of the world. We're supposed to be the salt of the earth. You're supposed to influence the world, not be influenced by it. That's the challenge. Okay? So that is human good itself, the happiness of all men. And he says, for though the good of an individual and the good of the city is the same, happiness, yet to obtain and preserve the good of the city appears to be greater and more perfect than to obtain your own happiness. For we must be satisfied if we can affect the good of an individual. That's great. It's great to help somebody or to help yourself. That's good. You're supposed to love yourself. But it's more beautiful and divine or godlike to affect the good of a nation and of whole cities. These, therefore, are the things which this method, being political, requires. So very simply, the chief end of the human life is to seek public happiness, to seek the happiness of everybody. I mean, that's a pretty happy message, I don't know how many people, if I went into a place and said, hey, I've got a message, I'd like us to pursue the happiness of everybody. I don't know that anybody would be offended by that or insulted. So when you see Christians going around and they're insulting people and offending people and people hate them and you have to wonder, what exactly are they talking about that makes people want to beat them up? Because if they were actually promoting public happiness, I think that they'd be pretty well received. Usually they're not pursuing what they're supposed to. They're usually just going in telling everybody they're going to hell and threatening everybody with lightning from heaven. But if we actually know what the chief end is, that we're supposed to be promoting and seeking public happiness, that everybody might be happy, I don't really know why anyone would resist the Christian message and say, no, I don't want to be a Christian. That's how I think about people anyway. If someone tells me they're not a Christian, what I ask them is so you don't believe in the golden rule? What are you, crazy person? You don't believe in the golden rule? So what, you don't love your neighbor as yourself? So when I say the commandments, don't steal, don't kill, don't commit adultery, you get frustrated by those commandments, well, then you're a crazy person, You'd have to be crazy to say you don't want to be a Christian. If being a Christian means loving your neighbor as yourself, what kind of crazy nut would say he doesn't want to be a Christian? So you just see what happens in our society is people present Christianity in such a wacky, weird way that it leads people to say, I don't want to be a Christian. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, I was told that in order to be a Christian, you need to wake up at 5 a.m. and you need to eat insects, and you're not allowed to brush your hair. You're only allowed to use ivory soap. You have to wear all black. That's what makes people not want to be Christians, not the actual end of the Christian life, if we're teaching the truth. So you just see how wacky people get out into the world. Wacky people get into the world and they identify as Christians and they start promoting their wackiness in the name of Christianity. And that's what leads people to say, I don't want to be a Christian. I don't like ivory soap. You just get it, and you'll run into all this kind of wackiness, all these rules and things that somebody decides are necessary. That's really not what Christianity is about. If there is a commandment, it's because it's protecting the happiness of other people. So, you're not allowed, let's say you're not allowed to drink and drive. And you say, oh, these oppressive rule, because we don't want you killing people, right? We don't want you driving your car into a van full of children while you're drunk in the middle of the afternoon. It's not an oppressive, strict religion that's meant to make your life miserable. We don't want you killing people, right? Oh, I'm not allowed to possess my own nuclear weapons. No, we don't want you blowing up cities. So yeah, there are going to be rules in religion because we're protecting the happiness of other people. You're not allowed to do certain things. You're not allowed to ride your bicycle across the highway because you'll make people swerve to try to not hit you, and they'll end up driving off a cliff or something like that. So we would rather just tell you that you're not allowed to ride your bike on the highway than have large explosive car crashes. That's where the commandments come from. It's just seeking human happiness. And if you think about it, and you think about, even when we complain, I mean, I complain about commandments. I know you all complain about commandments. If you just think about how ridiculous those complaints are, you can realize that that's what people get wrong about religion. Like God says, you shall work 6 days a week, and the seventh day is supposed to be a day of rest. And Sunday rolls around and you're like kicking and fussing because what? You have to take a day off to rest and go to church and relax, right? So you're like, foaming at the mouth and scratching yourself because you don't want to obey the commandments that tell you to take a day of rest. The disobedience is just dumb. We're just a bunch of crazy people. It's not just about ourselves, it's also about others. So for example, you can say, well, but I like to go out to a restaurant on Sunday. Well, you know what? The dishwasher at the restaurant doesn't like to go to the restaurant on Sunday. He would like for you to not go to the restaurant on Sunday because he doesn't want to wash your dishes, even though you're going to pay him, 20 cents to wash your dishes. He doesn't want to do that. He would like to have a day off. And so that commandment is not about me and what I want to do on Sunday. It's about everybody. It's about giving everybody a day off. So when you think about the commandments from this perspective, everything starts to make sense. Why should you not lie? Well, because when you lie to somebody, it leads them to make decisions based on false information, and they could screw up their whole life. So lying is bad. Why should you not kill? Well, obviously, that person has a right to not be killed. Why should you not be allowed to do this or not do that? Why should you dress a certain way? It's not for you. It's not because we're worried about, like if I dye my hair blue, that means I'm a drug addict. And you say, well, I don't do drugs, so I just want to dye my hair blue. It's not necessarily about you. That's the bigger question. That's the bigger question. Yeah. The bigger question is not what does this commandment do for you? It's about other people. What does it do for other people? And if you learn to think about the commandments without a selfish mindset that's only asking what's in it for you, and you think about how the commandments direct your behavior to actually be good for other people also, and direct their behavior to be good to you also, then you'll see that the commandments are actually happiness. The golden rule is called the law of freedom. It's how we actually seek happiness. Do to others as you would have them do to you. And if people say, I don't want to be a Christian, then either A, they don't understand what Christianity is, because Christianity is just happiness, or B, they're crazy people. And it's good for us to know that they don't want to obey the golden rule, because they'd probably try to kill us or something like that. And we shouldn't want to be with those people. So anyway, the chief end of life is simply the happiness of everybody. I don't know how anyone can get upset by that or rebel against that, unless you're just a crazy, selfish maniac that wants to live off of other people. So the message of ancient moral philosophy is a very happy message, very reasonable. And the message of ancient Christianity, true Christianity, is a very happy message. We need to live a life where we seek the happiness of everybody. And if you don't like that, well, you need to go lock yourself in your room and be miserable, because we all want to be happy. And so that's the golden rule. Be happy yourself and also let everybody else be happy. Very simple. That's the chief end of human life, right? Happiness, not just for yourself, but for everybody. All right. 354. We're just about done. I think that's all of chapter 2. So we understand what the chief end is. And as simple as that may seem, we're fallen creatures. And what you'll see is you'll turn around and in 5 minutes be clawing out somebody's eyes over some dumb thing, like, they took too much sugar or something like that. So we've got to learn to allow this idea of happiness to kind of work its way through our soul. And we've got to learn to be slow to respond to things. We've got to be thoughtful. We've got to not set our desires on things that are not in our control. That's part of philosophy, right? We've got to learn to not desire things that we don't control, because that's what makes us miserable. That's what makes us want to kill people and step on other people. when we desire something and it looks like they might get it, so now we have to eliminate them. We have to learn to not seek those things like that, but be content. Realize that we really don't need a whole lot. God's made us very special. We don't need to eat a whole lot. We don't need a lot for clothing. We don't need much in terms of housing and things like that. We're very, very hardy animals. If you consider us compared to other animals, our life is actually very simple. We need very simple things. And when you realize that, you realize, like, you know what? I could just be happy today. I don't have to be miserable and spend the whole day thinking about the two things I don't have when I already have everything I need. I could actually spend my day trying to help somebody else. So let this idea of the chief end and public happiness kind of work its way through your brain. Think about it whenever you get frustrated, when you're arguing with your parents about stuff. Ask yourself whether you're being reasonable or not, whether your parents might actually be asking you to do things in certain ways for your own benefit and for the happiness of others. And you'll find that life's really not that bad. It's actually pretty happy. So anyway, that's all for today. Pretty easy message, pretty simple, happy message. But at the same time, for some reason, because we're all crazy, it's very difficult to live that life, which really makes us wonder what's wrong with us, right? Why can we not live that life? Why can't we be at peace with people? Why can't we just be content with things? Because we're corrupt and we've got problems, and we've got to learn to deal with those problems. You're not less happy with too little than with too much. Yeah, I would say even in America, most of our problems are actually because we have too much. We don't, I mean, when was the last time you really were struggling because you lacked something? Usually we're struggling because we got too much. Like our room's a mess because we've got too much stuff. You know, my desk's a mess because I have 780 pens and they're all over the place. You know, I need a pen. I need one pen and I've got 1,000. So it's usually too much. More stuff, more problems. Yeah. You guys are quote masters today. This is pretty impressive. Like, I think everything I say, you've got like examples and quotes for. That's pretty good. So yeah, most of our problems are caused by too much. So we have to learn to simplify. There are some people who pursue a lifestyle. There's a name for it. It's like a style of life. It's like primitive living. It's real simple, minimalist. I think it's called minimalism. You can look that up. Look up minimalism, and you see people who design houses and stuff with this idea of minimalism, like real simple, plain stuff. It's so peaceful and happy. We need to learn to not torment ourselves and not set our desires on things that are not in our control, right? So that's it. Well, the idea of a monk, you said just be a monk. The idea of a monk is, you know, the problem with monasticism is it's meant to be a way to purify yourself for the sake of others. It's not meant to be like you just become this like bottomless pit of self-reflection. You just like spend your life staring at your belly button, you know, worried about yourself. The purpose of being a monk is supposed to be to purify yourself, to free yourself, so that you can then, you know, serve others and do things. Like you could be a teacher, for example. You could be a teacher and not need to make $1 million, so you can actually serve other people because you live a religious life and you choose to live simply, things like that. Macrina, you said you can hire a minimalist coach to come to your house. Yeah, you know, that I could do that for you. If you ever need help, I could come. Just get a dumpster out front and give us about a half hour and we can fix everything. That's how I fix my life. We just every once in a while get a dumpster brought to the house, put outside, and we just empty the place. That's another reason why moving is good. If your family moves a lot, because you always have to choose what to keep and what to get rid of. If you live in the same place for a long time, it gets really bad. You just have stuff collected all over the place, stuff you're never even going to touch. So anyway, public happiness or political science is the chief end. So that's all for today. I hope that's helpful. That's chapter 2 of Aristotle's Ethics. So let's turn this recording off before I get in trouble.